Hello and welcome back to Ganga Education. On this platform, you will find quality lectures relating to the field of law, competitive examination in legal domain, important legal facts and legal history, all explained in clear and structured manner.
In today's video, we are going to discuss section 80 to 87 of Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita 2023 Offense against Women and Children.
Welcome to Ganga Education. आज हम डिस्कस करेंगे a very crucial section for your upcoming law exams, section 80 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which deals with dowry death. So, here's how we're going to tackle this topic today. First, we'll cover the legal definition itself under section 80. Then we'll decode its most essential ingredients. After that, we'll see how courts interpret this law through some landmark cases. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a quick exam-focused revision. All right, let's begin. Today, we're talking about Section 80 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita 2023. Now, this section deals with the very serious offense of dowry death. And let me tell you, understanding it is absolutely critical for both your judiciary and APO exams. Okay, what you see here is the language straight from the BEAR Act. Now, it might look like a lot of legal jargon, right? But simple language में समझें तो इसका मतलब ये है कि if a woman dies under unnatural circumstances, say from burns or some other injury, and this happens within 7 years of her marriage, and it's proven that just before she died she was being harassed for dowry by her husband or his family, then that death is legally called a dowry death. Now we move to what is probably the most critical part of this section, especially for your exams, the essential ingredients. Let's break down exactly what the prosecution has to prove in court to make a case for dowry death. So there are 5 essential elements here, and listen carefully. All of them must be satisfied. First, the death has to be unnatural, not from normal causes. Second, it must happen within 7 years of the marriage. Third, there must be solid evidence of cruelty or harassment by the husband or his relatives. Fourth, and this is the heart of the offense, the harassment must be connected to a demand for dowry. And fifth, this harassment must have happened soon before her death. The prosecution needs to prove every single one of these points. So, here's the crucial point. Once the prosecution successfully proves all these essential ingredients in court, the law does something incredibly powerful. It creates a presumption of guilt under the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam. This means the court will actually presume that the husband or his relatives caused the death. The burden of proof then dramatically flips to the accused to prove that they are innocent. That's a huge deal in a criminal trial. Okay, so we've understood the text of the law. But law isn't just what's written. It's also about how it's applied in real life. So let's explore how our courts have interpreted this section through a practical example and some landmark cases that have really shaped its meaning. Let's take a practical scenario. Suppose a woman dies from burns 3 years after her marriage. Her family comes to court and provides letters she wrote detailing how her husband would repeatedly beat her because he was demanding a car. Now let's connect the dots. Is the death unnatural? Yes, burns. Within the 7-year time frame? Yes, 3 years. Was there cruelty for dowry? Yes, beating for a car. Did it happen soon before? The pattern was repeated, you see? This is a textbook case where Section 80 would apply. Now, this brings up a very common legal debate. What does the phrase soon before death actually mean? Is it a day before? A week? A month? The law itself doesn't give a specific timeline, and this has led to a lot of judicial interpretation. So what do the courts have to say about this? And this is where the landmark case of Satvir Singh versus the state of Punjab is so important. The Supreme Court gave a vital clarification on this exact phrase. The court ruled that soon before does not mean immediately before. Instead, there must be a proximate and live connection between the harassment and the death. This implies there has to be a continuous link, a chain of events. So if the cruelty happened a long time ago with no connection to the death, Section 80 wouldn't apply. Another really important case you need to know is Kansraj versus the state of Punjab. The issue here was, can you hold all of the husband's relatives responsible for a dowry death? The Supreme Court said no. A blanket liability cannot be just thrown on every relative. The prosecution must provide specific evidence showing which relative was actively involved in the cruelty or harassment. Only those individuals can be convicted. This whole principle can be understood through a fascinating legal maxim called res ipsa loquitur. It's Latin, and it means the thing speaks for itself. In dowry death cases, direct evidence of the final act is often very rare because these things happen behind closed doors. But the circumstances themselves, the suspicious death of a young, newly married woman in her husband's home following a pattern of dowry harassment, well, those circumstances speak volumes. They point towards guilt. All right, let's move into our final section, which is designed specifically for your exam preparation. We're now going to consolidate all the key information that you absolutely need to know about Section 80. First things first, it's very important to note that this provision isn't entirely new. Pehle, this was found under Section 304B of the Indian Penal Code, the IPC. With the new criminal laws, it has simply been renumbered as Section 80 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, 2023. The core of the law is largely the same, but the section number has changed, and you must remember that. Now about the punishment. Committing dowry death under Section 80 carries a very, very stringent penalty. There is a minimum mandatory sentence of 7 years imprisonment, and this can be extended all the way to imprisonment for life. It is also, of course, a non-bailable offense. So here are a few quick tips for your judiciary and APO exams. For prelims, you can expect direct, factual questions on the section number, 80, the minimum punishment, 7 years, and the time limit, 7 years of marriage. For mains, be prepared for problem-based questions where they give you a scenario and you'll have to apply these essential ingredients. You might also be asked to write a short note on dowry death, and you'll score high if you support it with key case laws like Satvir Singh. Okay, for a final quick revision, just lock these 4 points in your mind. 1, the section number. It's Section 80 of the BNS. 2, the core concept, an unnatural death of a woman within 7 years of marriage because of dowry-related cruelty. 3, the punishment, a minimum of 7 years, which can go up to life imprisonment. And 4, the landmark case, Satvir Singh, which defines soon before death. If you can remember just these 4 points, you've got a really solid grasp of the basics. I hope this breakdown of Section 80 has been clear and really helpful for your preparation. For more legal content focused on judiciary, APO, and other law exams, please stay connected with us here at Ganga Education. Today, we're going to tackle 2 really crucial sections from the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita 2023. I'm talking about Sections 81 and 82. Now, these deal with offenses against marriage. And let me tell you, if you're preparing for the judiciary or APO exams, you absolutely need to understand these inside and out. Just think about it for a second. What happens when a marriage, or what looks like a marriage, is built entirely on a lie? A promise that was completely hollow from the start. This goes way beyond just a personal betrayal. It's a very serious legal matter. So what does our law have to say about this? Let's find out. So we all know that marriage is a legal institution, right? It comes with a whole set of rights and responsibilities. But, the law's job doesn't just end at recognizing marriage. It also has to protect it, to make sure the sacred institution isn't twisted and used as a weapon for fraud. And that is exactly where these sections come into play. Think of them as a legal shield, specifically designed to protect people, especially women, from being exploited through a fake promise of marriage. The whole point is to defend both the dignity of the person and the sanctity of marriage itself. All right, let's kick things off with Section 81. Now, the official title is a bit of a mouthful. Cohabitation caused by a man deceitfully inducing a belief of lawful marriage. Phew. But in simple terms, what does it really mean? Well, it targets a very specific situation where a man tricks a woman into believing they're married and based on that lie, gets her to live with him. So, to break it down even further, the law says this. If a man uses deceit, and that word is key, it means active cheating or fraud, to make a woman who isn't his lawful wife believe that she is, and then, and this is the next crucial step, cohabits with her based on that false belief, he's committing an offense under Section 81. It's that simple. Okay, now for an exam perspective, this is super important. For the prosecution to make a case stick, they have to prove 5 essential ingredients. Let's walk through them. First off, the accused has to be a man. Second, the woman must not be lawfully married to him. Third, and this is the heart of the offense, deceit must have been used. Think of something like a fake marriage ceremony. Fourth, that deceit must have directly caused the woman to believe she was legally married. And finally, the cohabitation or sexual intercourse happened because of that false belief. All 5 have to be there. There's a powerful legal maxim that perfectly captures this idea. It's frauds omni vitit, and it means fraud vitiates everything. Basically, fraud poisons the whole deal. It makes everything invalid. It's like, imagine you buy what you think is a pure gold bar, but later find out it's just gold-plated lead. The fraud makes the entire transaction void. It's the same logic here. Even if the woman agreed to cohabit, her consent is invalid because it was obtained through a fundamental lie about her marital status. All right, so that was Section 81. Now let's move on to Section 82, which deals with an offense most of us are more familiar with, bigamy. In the simplest possible terms, this is about marrying someone new while you're still legally married to your first spouse and that spouse is still alive. But here's where it gets interesting. Section 82 isn't just one blanket offense. It's actually split into two parts. Subsection 1 covers what you might call simple bigamy, but subsection 2, well, that deals with an aggravated or more serious version. And this kicks in when the person not only commits bigamy, but also actively hides their first marriage from the second spouse. That act of concealment is the game changer. So, to prove bigamy in court, the prosecution has a clear checklist. Let's go through it. 1. There must be a valid, existing first marriage. 2. The first spouse must be alive. 3. The accused went ahead and contracted a second marriage. 4. This second marriage is automatically void because of the first one. And 5, and this is only for the aggravated offense, they have to prove that crucial element of concealment. And this slide really shows you why that distinction we just talked about is so important. Look at the punishments. For simple bigamy, it's up to 7 years. But the moment you add concealment into the mix, it jumps up to 10 years. So why the tougher penalty? Well, the law recognizes that this isn't just an offense against the marriage system. It's a deep personal fraud against the second partner, who has been tricked into a void marriage. Okay, now we're getting to what is arguably the most critical part, especially if you're writing your mains exam, the landmark Supreme Court judgments. See, reading the bare act is one thing, but it's the case law that shows us how these sections are actually interpreted and applied in the real world by our courts. When it comes to Section 81, the case you absolutely have to know is Uday versus State of Karnataka. Here, the Supreme Court drew a very fine but crucial line. They said, look, just because a promise to marry is broken, it doesn't automatically become a crime. It crosses the line into deceit only if the promise was a lie from the absolute beginning, when there was never any intention to marry in the first place. The key is the fraudulent intention right from the start. And for Section 82, the go-to case is Balrao Shankar Lokhande. In this judgment, the Supreme Court set a very high bar for the prosecution. They established that to prove bigamy, you have to strictly prove that all the essential ceremonies for a valid second marriage actually took place. A simple confession from the accused saying, yes, I got married again, is not enough. You need solid proof of the ceremonies. All right, let's shift gears and focus on the brass tacks for your exams. We're going to consolidate the punishments and talk about how to tackle these sections in your papers. This table right here is your ultimate cheat sheet for revision, so let's lock it in. For deceitful cohabitation under Section 81, it's a hefty punishment of up to 10 years plus a fine. For simple bigamy, Section 82.1, that's up to 7 years. But add that element of concealment under 82.2 and the punishment jumps right back up to 10 years plus a fine. See the pattern? Now, for all my judiciary and APO aspirants, listen up. In your prelims, you're likely to see direct section-based questions. Something like, under which section of the BNS is bigamy with concealment punished? For your mains, be prepared for more. You could get a problem-based question where you have to apply the ingredients, or you might be asked to write a short note on either Section 81 or 82. All right, before we wrap up, let's do a super quick final revision to make sure all these key points are cemented in your memory. So if you remember nothing else, remember these 3 things. For Section 81, the keyword is deceit. For Section 82, the keyword is existing valid marriage. And for punishments, it's 10 years for Section 81, and for Section 82, it's a 7 or 10 year split depending on concealment. That's it. That's the core you need to know. I really hope this detailed breakdown of Sections 81 and 82 was helpful for your preparation. For more such content focused on judiciary, APO, and other law exams, make sure you stay connected with us here at Ganga Education.
Today, we're going to tackle 2 incredibly important sections from the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita 2023. We'll be looking at offenses related to marriage, specifically Sections 83 and 84. Now, if you're preparing for your judiciary or APO exams, you know that understanding these sections inside and out is absolutely crucial.
All right, so here's our plan for this session. We'll start with a quick introduction to marriage offenses under the BNS. Then we're going to do a deep dive into Section 83, followed by Section 84. After that, we'll break down the key differences between them, backed up by some landmark case law, and of course, we'll wrap up with some really practical exam tips and a quick revision. So, before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's understand the bigger picture. Why did these sections even exist? Well, they're designed to protect the sanctity of marriage. The whole idea is to make sure that this sacred institution is based on honesty, legality, and genuine consent, not on deception or exploitation. Okay, let's jump right in. The best way to understand these two sections is to see their core purpose. Think of it like this. Section 83 deals with a fraudulent marriage ceremony, where the wedding itself is a sham. On the other hand, Section 84 addresses criminal interference in a marriage that already exists.
First up, let's break down Section 83. This section targets a very specific situation. It's about a person who, with a dishonest or fraudulent intention, goes through a marriage ceremony knowing full well that it's not a legally valid marriage. The entire focus here is on the fraud that happens during the ceremony.
So, to put that legal language into simple terms, it basically means this. If any person dishonestly, or with an intent to deceive, participates in a marriage ritual, knowing that the ritual won't result in a lawful marriage, then they've committed an offense under Section 83.
Now, for the prosecution to prove an offense under this section, they need to establish 4 essential ingredients. Let's walk through them. First, a marriage ceremony must have actually been performed. Second, the accused must have had a fraudulent or dishonest intention. Third, the accused knew that the marriage wasn't lawful. And finally, and this is key, they deceived the other party into believing it was a valid marriage.
There's a legal maxim that perfectly captures the essence of the fraudulent intent here. It's fros omnia vititat, which translates to fraud vitiates everything. In simple terms, this means that if any legal act is built on a foundation of fraud, it has no legal standing whatsoever. It becomes void.
So, what are the consequences? Let's talk about the punishment. If a person is found guilty under Section 83, they can face imprisonment for up to 7 years, and they'll also be liable to pay a fine. It's also important for you to remember that this is a non-bailable offense.
Okay, let's switch gears now and move on to Section 84. This one is quite different from Section 83. You see, this section deals with criminal interference by a third party in an already existing valid marriage, and usually for an immoral purpose.
So, Section 84 criminalizes the act of taking or enticing away or detaining a woman who is already married to another man. But here's the most crucial element, the intent. The act must be done with the specific intention that she may have illicit intercourse with any person. Just like before, to prove an offense under Section 84, the prosecution needs to establish 4 key ingredients. First, the woman must be married. Second, the accused must have knowledge of her marital status. Third, the accused must have taken or enticed her away, and the most important ingredient, the fourth one, is the criminal intention, the intent to facilitate illicit intercourse. Now, the punishment under this section is less severe compared to Section 83. An offender can be punished with imprisonment for up to 2 years, or with a fine, or with both. And unlike Section 83, this is a bailable offense.
All right, now let's really focus on the core differences between these two sections. This is extremely important, especially for your exams, because understanding the distinction will make it so much easier to tackle those problem-based questions.
So here's the main takeaway. The focus of Section 83 is on the deception in the ceremony itself, making the marriage invalid from the very beginning. In complete contrast, Section 84 focuses on interfering with an existing, valid marriage with the goal of facilitating illicit relations.
A landmark case for Section 83 is Bharatiya Shankar versus the state of Maharashtra. Here, the Supreme Court made it very clear that to establish an offense under Section 83, it's necessary to prove that the essential marriage ceremonies were actually performed. Without proof of those proper ceremonies, a valid marriage cannot be presumed.
Similarly, for Section 84, we have the case of Alamgir versus the state of Bihar. In this case, the Supreme Court established that the most important element, the mens rea, if you will, is proving the intention to facilitate illicit intercourse. If that intention can't be proven, the offense simply isn't made out.
Okay, let's bring it all together now with some practical exam tips and a quick revision. When you're preparing these sections, here are the key things you really need to focus on.
For your prelims, you can expect direct questions on the section numbers, the duration of punishment, and whether the offense is bailable or non-bailable. For your mains, be prepared for problem-based questions that test your understanding of the ingredients and the differences between the two sections. And in the interview round, you might be asked about the social objective behind these laws.
All right, for a super quick revision, just remember these key points. Section 83, it's all about a fraudulent ceremony, with punishment up to 7 years. Section 84, this one's about enticing a married woman, with punishment up to 2 years. And remember, their core intents are completely different. For more focused legal content like this, tailored for Judiciary, APO, and other law exams, make sure you stay connected with us here at Ganga Education.
Today, we're diving into a really important provision from the new Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, 2023. We'll be breaking down Section 85, which deals with cruelty in the context of marriage.
So, let's start with the most fundamental question, shall we? When the law talks about cruelty, what does that actually mean? Is it only about physical violence, or does it cover a lot more? Let's find out together.
All right, so today we're discussing Section 85 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita 2023. At its heart, this section makes it a crime for a husband or even the husband's relatives to commit any act of cruelty against a married woman.
The law itself starts with this line: whoever, being the husband or the relative of the husband of a woman, subjects such woman to cruelty. So what does that mean in simple terms? It means if a husband or his family members are cruel to his wife, they are legally on the hook for it.
To really understand this section, you need to know that it has 3 very important ingredients. To prove this offense, all 3 must be present.
First, the person who has suffered must be a married woman. Second, the person accused of the crime has to be either her husband or a relative of her husband. And third, and this is the absolute key to the whole thing, the woman must have been subjected to cruelty. This specific word, cruelty, is what we really need to unpack.
Okay, so that brings us to the next logical question, right? What exactly is cruelty in the eyes of the law? Well, the answer isn't in Section 85 itself. To find the definition, we have to look at the very next section, Section 86.
Section 86 actually breaks down cruelty into 2 parts. Clause A talks about any willful action that is so bad it's likely to drive a woman to commit suicide or cause her grave physical or mental harm or endanger her life, limbs, or health. Then you have Clause B, which is very specific. It deals with dowry harassment. It defines cruelty as harassing a woman to force her or her family to meet illegal demands for property or other valuables. Now, to make sure all of this theory is crystal clear, let's walk through a practical, real-world example.
Imagine this scenario. A husband and his family are constantly pressuring his wife for more dowry. They keep threatening her, saying they'll kick her out of the house if she doesn't meet their demands. Naturally, this constant harassment is causing her severe mental distress. This situation is a textbook case of cruelty under Section 85, specifically falling under the dowry harassment definition in Section 86, Clause B.
You know, the text of the law is one thing, but how our courts interpret that law is absolutely crucial. So let's take a look at a landmark case that really shaped the meaning of cruelty.
The case we're talking about is Girdhar Shankar Tawade versus the state of Maharashtra. This was a very significant judgment delivered by the Supreme Court back in 2002.
The main principle that came out of this case was a huge deal. The Supreme Court held that cruelty is not just limited to physical violence. They made it very clear that mental harassment, anything that causes suffering or the fear of harm, also counts as cruelty. This ruling was a real game changer because it officially widened the law to include psychological abuse.
Now, let's cover something that is absolutely vital for your exams. How does this new section connect with the old law? More specifically, which section has it replaced? This provision in the new Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita is what used to be the famous Section 498A of the Indian Penal Code 1860. It's so important that you remember this. Section 498A IPC has now been replaced by Section 85 of the BNS 2023. When you're writing your exams, make sure you cite the new section and the new act.
So, let's get straight to the point. Why do you need to pay extra attention to this section for your upcoming exams?
For both the Judiciary prelims and the mains exams, this section is a very high-yield topic. You can definitely expect problem-based questions in the mains. And for the APO exams, they often ask direct questions about the definition of cruelty and the related case laws. So you absolutely must prepare this topic well.
All right, before we finish up, let's do a quick revision of the key takeaways, just to make sure everything is locked in. First, remember Section 85 of the BNS 2023. It criminalizes cruelty by a husband or his relatives against a married woman. Second, the core concept is cruelty, and its definition in Section 86 covers both grave mental or physical harm and dowry harassment. And third, remember its exam importance. It's a key topic for both judiciary and APO exams, and it has officially replaced the old Section 498A of the IPC. For more judiciary-focused legal content, stay connected with Ganga Education. Today we're going to break down 3 really critical sections of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, laws that are all about protecting women's rights and safety, both in and around marriage. So, first things first. Before we dive into the legal text, let's really frame the problem that these laws are trying to solve. Okay, so marriage. It's supposed to be this institution built on safety, right? Companionship, dignity. But the harsh reality for so many women is totally different. It becomes a nightmare of harassment, cruelty, and abuse, a lot of the time tied to these relentless demands for dowry. And that gap, well, that's what the law is trying to close. So, the law steps in to provide a shield. And that first line of defense, it's Section 85 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Let's get right into it. Now, this section is incredibly direct and really powerful. It takes aim at domestic violence, harassment, and all that dowry-related abuse that happens behind closed doors, right inside the home. So, for this to actually hold up in court, the prosecution has to tick 4 specific boxes. It's like a checklist, you know? First, the victim has to be a married woman. Second, the accused has to be her husband or one of his relatives. Third, she must have actually been subjected to cruelty. And fourth, and this is key, that act has to fit the legal definition of cruelty, which we'll get to in a minute. And believe me, the consequences are serious. If someone is convicted, they're looking at up to 3 years in prison, plus a fine. This is the law basically saying, hey, this isn't just some private family squabble. No, this is a criminal offense. That's from the Supreme Court. And it's an absolutely critical point. The courts have been so clear on this. Cruelty isn't just about what you can see, like bruises. The psychological scars, they can be just as damaging. And this idea was really cemented in the landmark case of Girdhar Shankar Tawade versus the state of Maharashtra. Yeah, so in this case, the Supreme Court really tackled this question head-on. What is cruelty, legally speaking? And they established that any kind of conduct that causes mental suffering, that creates fear, that is just as unlawful as physical abuse. So, what's the big takeaway here? It's that the law recognizes both kinds of wounds, the ones you can see and the ones you can't. You know, persistent humiliation, threats, constant harassment, all of that falls under the law's protection.
Okay, so we've been throwing around this word cruelty a lot. But what does it actually mean in the eyes of the law? Well, that's exactly what Section 86 is for. It gives us the official definition.
So the law lays out this very clear 2-part definition. And it's written this way on purpose, to be specific, but also broad enough to cover a whole range of abusive behaviors. And you can see how specific the law gets here. It really separates cruelty into 2 distinct categories. Part A is about any willful conduct that's so bad it could actually drive a woman to suicide or cause her serious harm, physically or mentally. And then there's Part B, which explicitly and directly calls out harassment over dowry. All right, let's break that down a bit. What are the key things to remember? First, the act has to be intentional. It can't be an accident. Second, it's got to be severe. Third, it covers both mental and physical health. And maybe most importantly, it specifically calls out dowry harassment as its own form of cruelty. And there's a great case that illustrates the legal power behind this. Kalya Perumal versus the state of Tamil Nadu. Here, the Supreme Court basically confirmed, yep, when you harass a woman for dowry, you are committing a defined criminal act of cruelty. It's not just some social problem, it's a crime. Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. The law doesn't just protect a woman when she's already in a marriage. It also protects her freedom and her choice before she even enters one. And this brings us to Section 87. And this section is a really powerful shield for a woman's personal liberty. It stands firmly against things like forced marriage, human trafficking, and sexual exploitation. How? By making it a serious crime to compel a woman into those situations. So what's at the absolute heart of this crime? It's the violation of a woman's consent. The law is looking for two things: an act of coercion, we're talking kidnapping, threats, that kind of thing, and the specific intent to force her into a marriage or a sexual act against her will.
And just look at the punishment for this. We're talking up to 10 years in prison plus a fine. That tells you just how seriously the law views the crime of stealing a woman's right to choose for herself.
This brings us to a really crucial point from the case of Sham versus the state of Maharashtra. The court established that the crime is already complete the moment the abduction happens with that illegal intent. You don't have to wait for the forced marriage to actually take place. The law steps in to protect her autonomy right at that very first stage of coercion. It punishes the intent.
All right, so we've looked at 3 different sections. Let's pull them all together now and see what their collective impact is when it comes to protecting women.
When you lay them out like this, you really start to see the bigger picture, right? You have Section 85, protecting a woman's safety inside the home. Then Section 86 comes in and defines what cruelty even means, including that all-important dowry harassment. And finally, Section 87 safeguards her right to choose before a marriage ever happens. Together, they create this comprehensive legal safety net.
And what's the ultimate message here? It's that the state is sending a crystal clear signal. The welfare, the safety, and the personal freedom of women are paramount. Marriage has to be built on consent, not on coercion, period.
And that really leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? The law provides this shield. It's there on the books. But how do we make sure that shield is always within reach for every woman who needs it? That's the next big challenge.
Thank you for watching this session. If you found this lecture useful, do like, share and subscribe to Ganga Education. Keep learning, keep growing and stay connected for more law lectures.